When I joined, we were a 100% inbound org, and I knew that the way we were generating pipeline had limits in terms of how far it would scale. We're like, oh, we're not GRC. We're not that. We're this thing for founders. And what we realized over time was there's a huge opportunity for us, and we were actually a nascent GRC platform.
What was the one big unlock that took you from kind of noticing a little bit of interest from this other market to being like, no, we've got to actually pursue this?
So nobody was trying to sell to these larger companies. So we built a team to go look at that. We actually used sales as the tip of the spear. We hired experienced enterprise sellers, started small. We started with just 3, but they started proving success. We grew that team from, we had about a dozen people a year ago. We now have over 100 SDRs, and we have 5x'd our outbound pipeline over the last year.
Welcome to Go-to-Market Science, the podcast for CROs and revenue leaders scaling mature B2B companies. There's an art and there's a science to go-to-market, and we're obsessed with the science. In this podcast, we share tangible, actionable playbooks from the trenches, from what we're learning working as go-to-market strategy and RevOps consultants for our clients here at Union Square Consulting, and candid conversations with revenue leaders in the market that have been there. If this podcast delivers value, we'd love a 5-star rating and a follow. Now let's get into it.
Welcome back to another episode of CRO Stories. I'm your host, Rachel Buchert, and with me today is Stevie Case. Stevie is the current Chief Revenue Officer at Vanta, and she's also the former VP of Mid-Market Sales at Twilio, where she joined as one of their first ever AEs and played a huge pivotal role in the company's growth. So Stevie, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to chat.
Yeah, and when I heard you were coming on the show, I was so excited because there's another really fun fact about Stevie here, is that she was the first ever female professional gamer, which I think is super cool because the game she played was Quake. And that is one of the first games that I ever played as a kid. I was not good at it. It was really scary for me. But I learned that and I was like, oh, that is so cool. What a blast from the past.
I know, right? That makes me happy. Well, I had a lot of free time because I was just starting college and living in a dorm. So it was the perfect place to be playing a lot of games.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm a huge gamer right now. I don't know if we'll ever have video versions of these podcasts up, but if we do, you can see the wall behind me is just a random, I guess there's none of it's really gaming related, but it's a good representation of kind of my lifestyle and art and weird stuff. So yeah, I'm a huge gamer as well. But today, Stevie, so you're a very successful CRO for Vanta now, and you're going on almost 4 years with them, which is about double the average tenure for a CRO and still going strong. So before we get into your backstory, which I know is also a very crazy and interesting story, I wanted to ask, what kind of personality trait or internal drive would you say you've pretty much always possessed that led to both, your gaming achievements back then in a male-dominated game and your achievements now, and also winning Chief Revenue Officer of the Year from the Revenue Operations Alliance?
Yeah, thank you. It's a huge honor. And honestly, I feel like there are a lot of common threads there. And the number one common thread is I am just incredibly competitive and I love to win. I am just driven to come out on top of the leaderboard. And, that was true when I was gaming. I didn't really think about the fact that it was very male dominated at the time. I mean, that became obvious over time, but I was just really into it and I really wanted to win. And that has really carried through to my professional career. And I think that there's just a kind of a growth mindset at the heart of that, which is anytime I get into a competitive situation, I want to dissect it. I want to understand, what does it even mean to win in these circumstances? And, there are usually fairly obvious answers for a CRO, what that win looks like. But it can come with a lot of nuance and secondary metrics and, differing opinions. So I love it. I do feel like it's a very complex game and I feel really lucky to get to play with such a great team.
That's awesome. And I feel like I also have a bit of that competitive drive as well. I think what holds me back a lot is that kind of imposter syndrome, I guess. So how have you done all these things without having that affect you?
I mean, I think the reality is that, okay, maybe not everyone, but 98% of people experience imposter syndrome. And so a big part of my journey has just been accepting that and recognizing that it is normal to feel that way And then also looking around the table as I've gotten into these larger and larger rooms with incredibly successful people and realizing they are just very normal people as well. And most of them also have imposter syndrome, and most of them like are they all have their own unique backgrounds. And that everybody I am surrounded by is incredibly smart, but there's kind of this awakening that happens at a certain point where you realize that the folks you're surrounded with, like, yeah, they bring special things, but so do you. And there's really no reason that you can't be at that table, that I can't be at that table. So there was a switch that flipped for me a few years ago that went from me thinking, well, why me? I'm not sure I belong at that table or in that room. And it flipped to thinking, well, why not me? Like, am I giving these other folks like too much credit for knowing something I don't know? And what I've really come to terms with is everybody brings a unique approach, everybody brings unique experience. And as long as I am always trying and showing up, I am also the other characteristic I would add to competitive is stubborn. I will keep showing up. I will work harder than anybody else. I will like make it happen. So if I bring that stubbornness and a growth mindset, I am confident that I can make it work anywhere.
Absolutely. I love that. And I think stubbornness and showing up is a huge, huge player for a lot of people who succeed. I know it is a part of my success as well. Because people would be surprised, like how many people that they're like, quote unquote, competing with in any space don't even show up. So just by showing up and giving it your best, like you're already out competing so many people.
Yeah, that is the thing I remind myself of. Anytime that imposter syndrome creeps in or, I'm not sure if I'm doing a good job, like the thing I try to always recenter around is I am doing my best and I trust myself to show up and put in my best effort. And whatever I've got to give on any given day, I am showing up and I am giving 100% of that. So as long as I trust that, I have really learned to just accept that I'm going to make mistakes. It's not always going to be perfect, but I've put in my best effort and I can count on the fact that I will do the same thing tomorrow. So when I trust that, I know that I can deliver, and then I can just kind of relax and not be so hard on myself along the way.
Yeah. Yeah. That'll kill momentum immediately. It's just bringing yourself down, being hard on yourself for sure. All right, Stevie. So give us the story. How did you become a professional gamer killing Lovecraftian monsters? And then the journey from that to killing it at Twilio and now at Vanta.
Yeah, so gaming happened very organically for me. I played games when I was a kid. I was always into board games, and these are the days of like the Apple IIe, and even as a little kid, I was playing on those early consoles and early computers. So there was always like an interest in there, but when I got to university, I was pre-law. I was studying political science. I had this intention to go into law and politics. And, I had grown up with no exposure to business or anything like that, but started hanging out, of course, with really smart kids. I was living on the honors floor of the dorm. So I was surrounded by these smart people who happened to get into games. And these friends introduced me to Doom and then to Quake, which ended up being one of the very first big multiplayer games. And I just loved it, and I was super competitive, they were competitive, we were the first team to ever win a team tournament in Quake, and it just kinda snowballed. I had the opportunity to play against the guy who was the designer of Doom and Quake at his own game, and I beat him in a best
That's
of 3
crazy.
match. And that was really what, like, blew the gates open and, shifted my focus. So I ended up dropping out of college and I went down to Dallas, which was like the heart of the shooter universe at that point. So first person shooters were all getting made there around id Software. And I went down there and played games, and then I started making games professionally. So that was a wild ride. And, it seems counterintuitive, but that was my entry into tech. Like, if not for that, I would have not had a career in tech because through that, I learned, how to build my own PC so I could have a competitive rig. I started making games and I learned how to build software, even though at the time I didn't realize that's what I was doing. So that led me on this path where I ended up really learning to make games as a product manager. I then along the way had a vendor who was selling me his technology say, "Hey, I need to hire a junior salesperson. I think I could teach you to sell." And I love to lean into discomfort. So took that job, and that was about 18 years ago. And I've been on this revenue path ever since. Started out, I was selling technology to video game companies. And over time, video game companies became a smaller and smaller percentage of my portfolio until I looked up one day and I'm like, oh, I'm just in mainstream tech. And video games, like there, I occasionally talk to video game companies, but now it's the exception. So seems like a kind of random path, but like there were these moments of connection that led me here.
Yeah, it's always fascinates me, like the line of dominoes that are invisibly set up in front of us. We never know like what new interest we're going to pursue or what thing we're going to learn, a person we're going to meet that's going to lead to like down the road something so much bigger. Like that's just crazy to me.
Yeah, it's for me, the thing that made it possible because I did not pre-plan any of that. It was meeting interesting people. And then the thing I look back on that I think was key to all of it was the willingness to say yes and to lean into discomfort. And every huge opportunity I got, I remember thinking if I was scared of it, it was probably the right choice. Because at the time, like none of this felt comfortable or familiar. And so every time I got an opportunity that felt uncomfortable, I thought, okay, this must be the thing to do because it's so foreign to me. It's so uncomfortable. And so I said yes to all of those things. And that path led me to where I am.
Absolutely. I think I resonate with that a lot because, you know, same thing for me. Like everything that has ever helped me grow in my life has been because I like allowed it to be myself to be uncomfortable and to like chase the uncomfortable thing, knowing that it was, you know, the best thing that I could do at that point in time. That's so important. A lot of people are so scared of discomfort and they don't
Yeah.
realize how much they're hindering themselves.
Totally. I mean, that's where you get the growth edges. Like you have to put yourself into uncomfortable positions if you want to learn at a rapid pace. And I think that rapid pace is the key, right? Everybody's learning, but if you can really dive into these situations where they are so uncomfortable and so unknown, that's where you get the most rapid, the like most appreciable development is when you're leaning into these things that you don't know. So I will always and forever take those opportunities, and sometimes that means you fall on your face, and that's okay, that's part of the journey.
Yep, exactly. And so you became the number one enterprise AE globally at Twilio and then climbed to vice president, managing $425 million in ARR. What was harder for you, being the best seller or leading a team of sellers?
I would say leading a team of sellers is harder. Like the beauty of being a salesperson, an enterprise, whether that's enterprise or more like it's an SMB salesperson, is I think that it's a lot like gaming in that you are in control of your own destiny in a lot of ways. You can be very focused on your outcome. What I loved about that is I had been in sales leadership roles before, but when I went to Twilio, I had this chance to just take a quota again and be one of the first enterprise AEs in the business. And I loved it because leadership pitched me on the idea, come over and like, we want to have our first $1 million salesperson come help us establish the enterprise business. And I loved it because it was like a solo game. It was like solo play where I could go and really just bet on myself. I love roles where I can bet on myself. And so I felt really comfortable in that. So I resisted moving into leadership for quite a while. I stayed in that AE role for about 2.5 years. And then I did move into leadership. And when I did, like I loved every minute of that, but it takes a lot more patience and the results are delayed. So you have to really get comfortable in this leadership position with trusting your instincts and deploying strategies across large groups of people that you know you don't get that instant gratification. You don't get the instant, like, oh, that worked. Sometimes it takes weeks to months to sometimes even years to prove that your strategy was effective. So you have to have a lot of patience and you also have to have like a lot of like, man, I don't even know what the right word for it is, but like a lot of trust and faith in yourself. And like you just have to maintain like this stubborn belief in what you're doing because especially in the early days of rolling out a strategy as a sales leader or a revenue leader, there's not typically a lot of validation and there are not really going to be people around you saying, "Yep, you're doing the right thing. Keep going." There you really have to like formulate your theory, roll that strategy out, and then really measure and trust the data. And then you have to hope that at some point you do get that validation through the data that what you've done is effective. But it's a much more of a delayed gratification and a longer game for sure.
Yeah, and since there is such like a long time to see actual revenue results, what were some of the big like leading indicators or metrics that turned out to be good indicators of seeing that revenue down the line?
I mean, I think that like the truth is you got to figure that out for each problem you're trying to solve. And so at Twilio, for example, one of the biggest things I had to solve was moving from an inbound only organization to an outbound organization. And that transition is, it seems like it would be easy, like it's conceptually easy to understand that you're going to take a sales team and instead of having them just take leads, they're going to go out and hunt. But like, my gosh, there's a lot of human psychology and technology and workflow and like just stuff in that process of how you get people to do that in a repeatable way and how you measure that success. So what I found is anytime you got a problem you're trying to solve, everybody's focused on the outcome of like, okay, we want more outbound pipeline. What you've got to do is break down step by step. How would we get there? And you've got to develop a theory of the case for what each of those steps is. And then you really do have to start with the most basic first step and prove you can get repeatability of that basic first step, measure that, and then move to step two. So it can feel unbelievably slow. And, like with Twilio, with outbounding, a lot of it was like, what is that basic playbook? So I actually sat down and I wrote the outbound playbook for my team, said, here at this company, here is how I believe the correct way to outbound is. And then we started measuring the very first steps that I defined in that playbook. And that is true of any problem you want to break down. You got to start from that very first activity and then really celebrate when people do that first thing, even though it's not yet getting the outcome you want.
Absolutely. That sounds a lot like, I mean, it's validating to hear because at Union Square Consulting, most of 90% of what we do is surrounded around process design, making sure that people have that playbook and they have the adoption from their team to actually like execute properly and consistently. So you can get real data that can then tell you, like, hey, what next can we change? What can we operate now? What can we accelerate with AI? Yada, yada, yada. Would you say that was accurate for like the first steps that you're talking about? Would you say it is down to like the process and stuff and the adoption of it?
Yes. And I think that the important thing about that, though, is, it's easy to enter these situations where you've got something you need to solve or like you need a goal you need to hit and think, I'm going to write the entire playbook end to end, then we're just going to go execute on that. The truth is, when you've got like these complex things, like you need to move a team to outbound or you need to raise net retention or you're trying to hit a big revenue growth goal, the playbook almost can't be fully known in advance. So the way that I like to think about this is I write a playbook that is a theory, it is a hypothesis of how we would get to the end state. You then start executing on the first steps. And the most important thing you have to do then is instrument what you're doing, get good measurement in there, and then develop an operating rhythm that inspects what you're doing so you can learn like where was I right and where was I wrong. I often talk about my team and the organization I built and our processes as a learning machine. And that is the single most important thing you can build in a revenue team is a learning machine because you're going to get things wrong in the first draft of the playbook and probably the 10th draft of the playbook too. But the most important thing is you've got a way to look at it, to have data that gives you feedback so you can figure out what you got wrong and then you can rebuild and adjust your next steps. So people who enter with that playbook pre-built and they don't deviate, that's the easiest way to go wrong.
Would you say that the reason leading a team was so much harder than just like being the best seller is because when you were the best seller, you're like one player mode, right? Like you knew what you wanted to do, you knew your processes, and you already knew you were going to follow on it and measure everything accurately. And then like when you're leading a team of sellers, I'm guessing like the hardest part is making sure that they just do what you're telling them to do and like following the processes consistently. Is that correct?
Yes, and there's this recognition that happens, and this is such a common thing when really great salespeople move into management, which is you move into management thinking, oh, I've got this all figured out. I know the right way to sell. I am very successful. I just need to explain to everybody else how to do it. And then you get into management and you realize that like, oh my gosh, there are lots of other people that are wildly successful and they are doing the opposite of what I do. And you come to realize that there are a lot of different ways to be successful at sales and in all of the jobs in a revenue organization. And when you try to force everybody to do it the way that worked for you, often what you see is people fail at that. It's kind of a setup for a failure for everyone. So part of that transition from being an IC to being in leadership is coming to make space and understand that everybody's got a little bit of a unique flavor that makes them great. And the key is how do you help them be even more successful with their own style that rather than trying to transform them into a copy of you because that won't be authentic and is rarely effective. So that's a one of the biggest challenges I see moving from sales into leadership is that appreciation of, oh wow, this is much more complex than I actually thought it was.
And how did you solve for that?
I screwed it up a lot at first.
Yeah.
At first it was like, oh, well, these guys are just doing it wrong. And then I tried to force them to do it my way. And, almost universally they would fail. And then I came to recognize really the hard way. I had a couple of sales reps in particular on that. First, I was managing an enterprise team at Twilio. And I had a couple of these like grizzled sales vets that like had their way. And I watched a couple of them just be unbelievably successful closing deals, doing things that I not only wouldn't have done, but would have actively told them not to do. And I just it was this moment of like, oh, wow, okay, there's a lot I don't know. And so once I figured that out, then I started realizing like, okay, actually they're onto something here and I might not totally understand it, but maybe I can help just add some gas to the fire. So then I would start to think about, okay, if I was going to make this unique person successful, how would I recommend they tweak their process instead of trying to change them and get them to do something a completely different way? And usually I was able to find what is the one big bottleneck for this person that keeps them from closing deals? And I would focus on that as opposed to trying to rewrite their playbook and have them sell in a totally different way. And when I saw that start to work, that was the big aha, okay. This is much more about how each person can be better as opposed to trying to get complete uniformity across a team.
I love that. And that's something that I don't hear a lot of other CROs talk about too, is like making sure each individual person can succeed in their own style. So I think that's like super important.
It's interesting because there are areas you have to get uniformity, there are and you gotta, make a game plan for yourself about what are those areas where we can't let people deviate. And an example of that would be, you've got salespeople and you need to set an expectation that they will do a certain amount of outbounding, for example. You can't say like, "Oh, well, this person has figured out a way to make 100% of their target from inbound." Like, you need people to stick to some of the playbook, but it's the stylistic things under that top layer that I think really make each person uniquely talented and successful. Help them lean into those. Generally, you'll get better results across the board.
And just making sure there it's still like you still have to log your data and like check the boxes in your CRM and everything. Like if your style is I don't ever log or like write down anything ever, that's probably not gonna work.
Doesn't work. Doesn't
No.
work. Yeah, and that is a battle. There are always these top performers that are lone wolves, and
Yeah.
I always go back to the Challenger Sale Classic. A sales book that really describes the downsides of that lone wolf persona, and that yes, they are often successful, but you will see that the challenger is consistently more successful. So when you got those lone wolves, this is where you've got to really work with them. And what I found is you have to get them on board. Like if you just try to force that kind of stuff, they will resist it forever and they will be resentful and eventually they will leave. You have to get them bought in on the value of what you're asking them to do. And often that's about explaining how they can help the whole team level up by modeling good behavior, why it matters from a manager's perspective. And if they've got a growth mindset, they will lean into it and learn.
So let's go back in time for a second. Talking about Q4 2019. I know now it's like kind of a long time ago. So your team hit 279% of their target in this quarter. Do you remember what happened that quarter and, what could be replicated?
Yeah, the stuff that led to that quarter being so successful is foundational, and it's the same stuff that is leading my team today at Vanta to success, which is breaking down those goals and having a hypothesis about how you're going to get there, and then just really emphasizing the repeatable activities at the base of that playbook. So there it was like, okay, we've got all this inbound opportunity. We probably had enough inbound to be meeting our number, but we knew we needed to make this outbound transition. So we really started emphasizing here are the basics of what we need to do. We need to be making X calls per day. We need to be sending Y number of emails per day. We need to be connecting with a certain number of prospects on a weekly basis and generating a certain number of opportunities. And so we started driving that knowing we didn't have to have all that outbound pipeline to hit the target, but that it was a part of this grander, longer transition we were going to try to make. But by driving that behavior and making it a repeatable part of our playbook, we ended up with so much more opportunity. And it really blew the lid off of what was possible. I think a lot of people and revenue leaders, they're managing to 100% of the target, but the target might be wrong. I like to manage just something higher than that, something bigger than that. It's sort of like, how much bigger can we go? Because when you aim beyond, you start to think about things differently and you change the structure of how you organize your work. And that's how you get to that like 200% plus. You don't get to 200% plus by just aiming for that 100% in target.
Okay. And you think if you were just kind of focusing in on that 100% target, do you think you wouldn't have hit that percentage over that on that
Yeah.
quarter?
Yeah. No, I don't think we would have. I think that when you aim for 100% and that is good enough, you get 100%, hopefully. Like, that's your best case scenario. If you miss by a little bit, you're under. And, when you shift the frame and you think about what is the maximum that is possible and what do I have under my control? I talk a lot with my team about controlling the controllables. If you really focus on controlling those controllables and you aim for the maximum possible outcome, if you miss by a bit, you're still probably going to be over 100%. So instead of like constraining yourself to the target, I really like to aim much higher than that and really aim for what is like the maximum possible outcome.
I love that. Yeah, it reminds me of this book that our CEO Eddie has been reading and telling us about. I'm going to butcher the title of it, but it's something like going from 2x to 10x, or it's easier to think about how do I 10x something rather than how do I 2x something, because you're not going to get to 10x by just doing more of what you're doing now. Like maybe you could 2x whatever you're doing by doing more of it. But to 10x, you have to have a completely different mindset and approach it in a completely different way in order to get there. So even if you don't get 10x, the way you're thinking about it is going to make you get way, way, way higher than just 2x.
I love this line of thinking, and this is actually one of the questions that I will ask my team and my leaders pretty frequently is, when we're stuck in that, like, it feels like a real grind just to like hit the target or to like make change. This will be one of the questions I will ask them is like, well, what would it take to like 5x or 10x what we're doing? Like, what would have to fundamentally be different? And I do find when you think in that way, you get a different result. So sometimes it's about like blowing apart the entire frame for how you're thinking about that growth and the targets and just doing it differently. I think now is such a natural time to do that too. In the advent of AI, all this AI powered tooling, you've got teams out there making millions, hundreds of millions of dollars with very small go-to-market teams. So it is possible. So challenging the thinking and trying to do things differently is really important if you want to just crush targets.
And you said a lot of the changes that were made for that quarter were like just foundational things that like built up over time. But do you remember any like one really big like process change or coaching pivot or something that you think just exploded that quarter?
Yeah, one of the biggest shifts on that team at that time was Twilio had always been this like bottoms up API centric developer platform. It was at the heart of everything we did. Our CEO talked about it. It was all developers. And so there had been this mindset, even though we were selling in the enterprise, that if we were outbounding, we should be outbounding to software engineers. And so we were doing that, but I actually developed this methodology I called the Twilio Sandwich, which was if you could marry this bottoms up approach of going out to the technical folks who would actually be using the platform, and at the same time coming top down and marrying that with really great classic enterprise selling to VP plus or C-suite stakeholders, that was the magic combo. And that magic combo is what really started working. And we did some really unique plays in that time frame. Like we were doing these enterprise hackathons. And what that looked like was we would organize a hackathon for a classic enterprise company. One of the best ones we did was actually at U-Haul, which was great. We showed up on site. We said, "Hey, we're gonna run a hackathon for the day for your technical team, and it'll be a fun event for them. We'll do prizes. We'll like teach them to use our technology." And then what we did was we set the executives up as the judges of the hackathon. And we armed the team to build use cases that had value to their business. So basically, we had a whole day of getting these folks into the platform, building with the tech, and then to the end of the day, showing how in one day they built these really material use cases and then demonstrating that to executive buyers. And that was just like, it just exploded because like the VPs and the buyers they were just blown away that you could build something so fast. And it made it very real and it was unique to their business. And so it was just this perfect storm of when you got that tops down and the bottoms up and they all saw what was possible, it just took off.
I love that. That's such a creative and unique idea. So there were you said there were judges. It was like a competition. I'm not super familiar with like a hackathon and what that means.
Yeah, basically what they did is we would break the room into teams. So in the case of the U-Haul hackathon, we had like 40 developers in the room. So I want to say we had like 6 or 7 different teams. Each team had their own use case and they had the day and we would sit with them. We would bring in folks from our Dev Angels team and we sat with them and helped them build. But at the end of the day, everybody would demo what they built. So each team would get up in front of the room. They would present the solution, why they built it, and what they built, and then they would demo it. And the judges were picking like what was the best solution. And generally, it was based on the demo, but also business impact. So, and everybody, it was all just for fun, but everybody got like these little prizes and trophies. And it just, for the company, it was a moment where they were offering a cool innovation focused experience to their technical folks. And it was like a retention event almost. And for us, obviously, we were thrilled to get these use cases in front of the buyers. And what we saw to the team that we did this with was it either closed deals faster or it dramatically expanded the size of the deal because they're like, oh my gosh, these 5 other use cases we just saw demoed are incredible. We want to do that too. So it was just like the art of the possible made real by their own people.
That's so cool. And so these were people that you already were working with.
Sometimes, not
Sometimes.
always.
Okay.
So sometimes we were doing this as like an expansion opportunity, like we had a contract in place, but we would show up and say, here are these, a dozen more use cases you should explore. In some cases, though, it was prospects. And it was like, this was an offering. We'll come in, no commitment from you, and run this hackathon, this innovation day. And they were so excited because this is a, exciting up and coming company, exciting technology. It was a chance to get their staff in there and see what's possible. So we were doing this with as well.
That's cool. Because then for them, it's like almost like a team building, like a fun, yeah. Such a smart idea.
Yeah, it
Who came
really
up with
was,
that?
like, effective. It was somebody on our developer angels team, which was, like, a team out of marketing that originally was working often with students, like, their focus was on early in career developers, and this was, like, an expansion of the concept of what they were, doing that we brought together as a program, and it still sticks with me as one of the most effective plays I've ever seen run in the enterprise.
And you said, that was kind of before that Q4?
Yes. Yeah,
Okay,
that was
cool.
one of those plays that led to just, like, outsized opportunities, and it really, like, field selling always we talk about this a lot now, we're post-pandemic, I think everybody is so used to being on Zoom and selling remotely, like, there's this hesitation to get in front of people. I think that was the other magic ingredient was we were on site in person. And I am finding that that was so effective then. It's even more effective now when you can get people to meet in person and see hands-on how things work. We just did that recently. We run in a yearly event called VantaCon at Vanta. And similarly, we like bring people on site and we have them get engaged with the technology and get hands-on and, be in the weeds with us in the product. And people get really excited about that. It's always been a good play, but I feel like post-pandemic, it's even
Yeah.
more effective.
And not just post-pandemic, but, like, in the grips of the AI world right now where everything just it's lost its authenticity online. You never really know what you're looking at, if it's real, who you're talking to, if it's real, you know? So, yeah, I think human in-person events is gonna be a big, big, big player, coming up.
I think so too. I think that there's real alpha to be found here for anybody investing in like real human activity. This is so we've made a big bet at Vanta this year on our sales development team. We grew that team from, we had about a dozen people a year ago. We now have over 100 SDRs. And what we're finding most effective with these human SDRs is that they are picking up the phone and calling people and having human conversations. And we have 5x'd our outbound pipeline over the last year. And a big part of it was getting in humans to make calls to other humans. It's like such a old school thing, but it works because, everybody's inbox is full of AI slop. And when you tell what's real and you've got all this AI slop in your inbox, a human picking up the phone and speaking to you is more impactful than ever before. So it's kind of counterintuitive, but we're finding it really works.
Quick pause. If you're getting value from this episode, I want to ask you a small favor. Take 30 seconds right now, open up the app you're listening to this on, and give us a 5-star rating. It sounds small, but it's the single biggest thing you can do to help us get conversations like this in front of more revenue leaders. While you're there, hit follow so you never miss an episode. Okay, let's get back into it.
So tell me a little bit more about that, and, I'm glad that we're, like, pivoting it. I was just about to pivot to Vanta, so thank you for that. Yeah, so your pipeline uh I guess your different ideas and plays that you've been running. When you came in as a CRO, did you notice that pipe gen was lagging behind, or if that was like your big bottleneck?
Not yet when I joined. So when I joined, we were a 100% inbound org. So we were just taking inbound. There was no outbound. Um, And then, there had been this, like, they had created this kind of automated outbound that ran for a bit that was effective at that time. This is pre-Gen AI. So there was this outbound engine that would send outbound emails. And that for a minute was fairly effective. But then that kind of fell off. It was pretty spammy. It was pretty basic in its capabilities. So really, we were back to square one of like an organization that was just 100% inbound. And that was working at the time. We were crushing targets and that was great. But I got brought there to like rapidly grow revenue. And I knew that the way we were doing that, the way we were generating pipeline had limits in terms of how far it would scale. The vast majority of our inbound was coming from search engine marketing. And, it's clearly there's growth there, but you can't 10x a business on that. So a lot of what I had to start from was, okay, how do we start to build an outbound motion? And it took us a while. Like we had an SDR team that, we really had to start like from the basics and square one with and started doing that outbound. But it took us about 2 years to get to the point where we really poured gas on that fire and went really big on human SDRs because that foundation had to be laid first.
Yeah, and what kind of foundations were you trying to lay with that first team?
It was really basics. Like, how do we talk about the value of this product? It sounds really obvious, but Vanta had wild product market fit, and we were getting all this inbound, and we had one call closes. It was incredible, and in those days, it was obvious that people needed this product because it was solving a very painful problem. So we were helping, in particular, startup founders to get SOC 2 compliant for the first time. And the reality was that they needed that SOC 2 audit report to unlock their own ability to sell their software and grow their companies. So it was like this revenue blocking thing. And so we started out even like Like, obviously, we built something good. We know it has value, but we didn't even really know how to articulate what the value was. And so we had to go through a process of defining, why do people buy this? How do we describe it? How do we talk about what it does for your business? And then once we define those talk tracks, we had to go through a process too of learning, like, who are our buyers? We know we're selling to founders. We know there's something there, but it seems there's more to it than that. So it was really an entire market and message mapping exercise to begin before we could even really get effective at that outbounding at all.
Yeah, that's a huge thing that I've been hearing a lot about recently. Like ICP, so important. And so many companies and, revenue leaders and even salespeople think like, oh, let's just look at, the types of people that we're closing, we're winning, and that's our ICP, obviously. But you don't realize the people that you're missing could very well be ICP, but you're just missing them because your messaging isn't the right thing they need to hear, or you're not focusing enough on them and their pain, or even just your speed to lead is crappy and and you're not like getting them fast enough.
Right. And you're not working those opportunities in the right way. You don't know how to speak to them. And that ended up being the case for our business. We have and had this incredible business down market where our ICP was really like startup founders of B2B software companies. We really leaned into that, and that remains a huge growth engine for us. But what we started to see was that there were these other folks in pipeline that were interested in Vanta and what we were doing. And we would occasionally see like security professionals, or we would see these chief information security officers or their teams. And I think for a while, we were sort of resistant to the idea. We're like, we're an automated compliance platform. We're not like, there was a whole space up market for GRC, governance, risk, and compliance. We're like, oh, we're not GRC. We're not that. We're this thing for founders. And what we realized over time was there was a huge opportunity for us, and we were actually a nascent GRC platform. And as we leaned into that, we've come to realize that we've got several distinct buyer personas. Founders are one of them. We also sell to these like first time, kind of the first security hire at a company who is establishing their program and building that, and they can now build that on Vanta. And then upmarket, we now sell to the office of the CISO, and they are really using us like a risk observability platform. So, we now call ourselves an agentic trust platform, but it's become this much broader thing. And it's kind of comical to look back because I think a lot of early investors passed on Vanta because they saw this, what they thought was a very small opportunity to like help people get SOC 2 compliant. And what they didn't see was this massive TAM that we were just starting to eat into. And so I think underestimating that initial market was easy to do, but we didn't see it yet either.
Yeah, what was the one big unlock that took you from kind of noticing a little bit of interest from this other market to being like, no, we've got to like actually pursue this and change some of our messaging and processes to do this? Like what made you realize and the board realize that there should be investment made here to pursue
It
this
took
other?
a while. Yeah, I mean, we first saw that there were some interesting enterprise logos in the pipeline and that we were actually closing them occasionally. And, you would see these like, huge enterprise logos, and in some cases, even public companies who would come to Vanta. And, when we talked to them, often it was like an individual business unit building a piece of software, and they needed to be compliant, and they did not want to use the legacy software the larger business was using because it was so bad, and they wanted something more modern. So we started seeing this pattern develop, and it's like, oh, there's something here. So then we built a team to go after that opportunity. Because one thing I've learned in a business is if you ask your team to do too many things, and they will always focus on what is the easier thing to execute on. And it was much easier to just go sell to founders because we knew that it was fast, it was easy. So nobody was trying to sell to these larger companies. So we built a team to go look at that, and it took a while to get traction because selling in the enterprise is obviously very different. So we almost had to get that team far enough away from the very successful startup business to give it the space to operate. And once we did that and we started to build a team of experienced enterprise sellers, they actually started to close deals. And it's like, okay, there's a there there. There is something happening here. And these we started to really um get thoughtful about our discovery. We were bringing back learnings to our product team and saying, here's what the opportunity is starting to look like. Here's what we're hearing from these buyers. And it was so clear that there was an opportunity here that we went back and actually there was a specific leadership team meeting. And now about 2.5 years ago, where I went in with a partner from our engineering and product development team, and we made the case that we needed to make a real enterprise investment. And first we made that case to the leadership team, then we made it to the board, and we mapped out what that could look like and how we thought we should start. And everybody gave us the thumbs up. And that was really the beginning of that true investment in the enterprise.
And what else made that case for you other than like, sometimes we close some of these enterprise clients and we think there's interest here. Was there anything like else really big that you had as evidence to get that approval?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that we really had to show was that there was an addressable market there and that we understood it sufficiently to know where we could play and where we could not yet, but could later. So we really mapped the competitive landscape. Part of the story we told at that time was not just that we were winning logos, but that in some cases we were winning in the enterprise against these like old legacy platforms and legacy pieces of technology. And when we could tell the story of why we were winning and we could talk about how big that market was, it was like, okay, everybody could then see what was going to be possible here. And then we started to talk about all these adjacencies for our platform and where it could eventually grow into. And that's when it became clear that it's like, okay, we've been looking at kind of myopically at this opportunity with founders and startups, and that remains huge. And we should continue doing that. And I think we can also do this because they are so tightly related. And it wasn't like a completely new product. We were able to tell a story that what we were going to build for the enterprise was also going to benefit founders. So it wasn't like, oh, let's go try to do two completely separate things at the same time. It was this virtuous cycle of, if we win in the enterprise, here's how it benefits our current focus part of the business as well. I think that's where everybody got comfortable that like, oh, this isn't just us forcing into some new secondary opportunity. Like these things are deeply tied together and one thing does benefit the other.
It probably it felt like an easy risk, like two-way door kind of thing. Like if we do this, we invest this money into it and it doesn't work out with this new audience, like we're still improving our main product.
Yeah, exactly. It was that tightly related, and we knew that that work would not go to waste, and whatever we learned there could continue to benefit our startups, our mid-market customers. So it was like there was this nice, safe fallback position if we couldn't quite make enterprise work.
And so once you guys made this decision and you made the tweaks to product and everything, when it came time for marketing and sales to do their part, did you need to develop new teams, like whole new marketing and sales teams, or did you just kind of train people that you had currently?
We did build new teams. And so in some cases, we were able to bring people who have been in the business for a long time over to those teams. But we actually did hire an experienced enterprise leader, and she started to build a sales team. And we went sales first instead of going out to the market and building a marketing team out of the gate and saying, hey, we've got an enterprise solution. We actually used sales as the tip of the spear. And we asked them to really focus on being an outbound team primarily because we hadn't yet established ourselves with those buyers. So sales went first and they really proved the market out. We hired an experienced enterprise sellers and we optimized for people who had built businesses before, like been early hires on a sales team in their past. And that team, we started small. We started with just 3, but they started proving success. And then we added a little bit more and a little bit more. And then you look up 2 years later and we now have a function that is showing repeatable success and true scale.
How different did that sales process have to be from what you were currently running?
Extremely. It was extremely different, and we really now have bifurcated the business. So we run separate rhythms. We have our down market business, and there we focus on startup founders and SMBs, where we will often see a first security hire. We run that almost as a separate unit from our upmarket business, where we're focused on the mid market and enterprise. And, the motions look very different, but the platform remains one platform. And that original hypothesis that if we built a great enterprise product, it would benefit those SMB and startup buyers has proven to be true. It's meant more data into the platform. It's meant more insight into vendor risk, and it's benefiting the entire ecosystem. So, we've been able to build these very different motions and two extremely different go to market teams, but they are all sort of benefiting the core of that agentic trust platform.
When you were building out this new like enterprise sales process, were there times where it like really broke and you had to workshop it and like figure it out, or walk me through that? What kind of broke down that you had to figure out?
Yeah, lots broke along the way. I mean, there was just so much we had to learn. We had to start with all hypotheses of who even the buyer was and what would resonate and what we were capable of. Like we had to spend a lot of time and energy really discovering what their requirements even were. So in those early days, one of the first things that broke or that we got wrong was the quotas. We started out and, very optimistically saying, okay, this is an enterprise team. We give them enterprise quotas. And what we found early days is that we really needed to give them a ramp because we were asking them to not just sell, but to truly do market discovery. So then we backed up, we gave them a more reasonable quota, and then we asked them to help us really create this great feedback loop to product. That was the second thing that really broke was we had this theory of what we were going to go sell to these enterprise buyers, but in practice, we were discovering the entire way what they actually needed. So we had to really build a much deeper feedback loop. We actually ended up moving the go-to-market team under a general manager who was a product manager. And they owned both the engineering and product development team and the go-to-market team for a year. And we did that because it brought the team so close together that the feedback loop to product was much tighter. So we did that for a year. And then once we got the repeatable success, then we brought go to market back into my team. But having those two close together was one of the most important things we did.
Yeah, so I'm guessing you had to like constantly be iterating the product based on what you're hearing in these enterprise calls. Like, can it do this? Well, not yet. And they're like, okay, you lost the deal. So you go back to product and you're like, we need this right now.
Yes. Yeah. And
Yeah.
like the
So
team got really good at that stack rank of features that was going to unlock opportunity. And we also had to be mindful because we didn't want to just kind of run after every shiny object. We wanted to be thoughtful about the strategy of what we were building. So we were taking all that feedback with a grain of salt, but our team was really contextualizing it. The go-to-market team specifically was contextualizing and stack ranking. Here's what we think needs to be built next and why. And that was then feeding back into our product organization. And through that, we developed this great cross-functional partnership and a theory of the case on the market of how we could really capture the opportunity.
and how did that transition or translate into how you worked with customers after the sale? So like your post customer follow up and customer success and stuff like that. Because at this point, you're seeing the product is kind of built by the customers in a way. So I'm yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely taken the same amount, if not more, revolution in how we serve customers. So just like we had to build an upmarket sales team, we had to build an upmarket team in post sales. So customer success and account management. We have started to build out like a solutions engineering and a solution architect function, a nascent like professional services team. And, we have really had to build because the motion of onboarding a startup is very clear and very simple, and we knew what that was. The motion of onboarding an enterprise looks very different. There's an entire implementation project to be run. So we have built an organization and a partner ecosystem to support that. But, that took different partners. It took a little bit of everything new. So our entire post-sales experience to get customers successful was really architected from scratch to support these larger customers.
And what kind of like qualitative or quantitative results did you see once you started implementing these new post sales processes?
Yeah, the biggest thing has been, I mean, one, we had to figure out like what is successful implementation? How do you define it? So started from scratch and we actually created an what we call our IHS, an implementation health score. And what we had to do was break down end to end for an enterprise customer, what is every step in that implementation journey? And the foundational understanding we developed was for every one of these customers, they're already starting with an existing program. So we have to treat every one of these like it's a migration. And they might be migrating from another tool, but they also might be migrating from their own internal manual processes. But so we treat it like a migration. We develop this score that shows the health of the integration and is it on track on time? And then we built a team to support every step of that process. And what we saw was just a radical improvement in that implementation health score over the course of about 6 months. So we went from a place where, wow, implementation is actually our biggest problem and bottleneck because we're leaving our customers to their own devices to figure it out, to a world where now we've got this very structured way to get them successful and we know exactly what the map is. We give it to them, we support them through it, and that implementation health score just skyrocketed.
Nice. That's awesome. And so how are you using that feedback now to like bring it back full circle around to sales and marketing?
Yeah, so now we're at the phase where this is not just an experiment. We're in the scale phase now. So we're scaling all those teams. And what it has now meant is we've gone back and we've had to add an upmarket and enterprise function to every part of our org. So we had to build an enterprise SDR team, a solutions engineering team, and we do now have dedicated marketing resources on this upmarket message. So now that we've got scaling success, the biggest focus for us is educating the market that we're even here. You know, part of the gold handcuffs of success with a first use case is people start to really associate you with that. So a lot of people still associate us with that SOC 2 for founders use case. And we still do, you know, thousands of those a year. But that education and awareness in the enterprise market that we are truly an enterprise grade trust platform that can serve your full GRC needs. Like there's a whole push to educate the market that that is now who we are as well. And so we're building all of the functions to let the world know that we're there.
That's awesome. And I find it really interesting that you guys chose to do like make sales spearhead this experimentation, specifically outbound to like really validate this theory that you had. And so not only is the experiment validated, but you also have these like logos that you can now use in your marketing and you have use cases and case studies and things like that that you can use in this marketing push. So you're not just like going dry right out in the marketing scene trying to like test messaging
Yeah, I think it
because
allowed us to learn a lot faster that way because we had humans in the conversation. We had a hypothesis, but they were out there to test and listen. And, you know, they signed up those design partners and grew us from there. And I think that, you know, it's not always going to work to have sales lead your effort into a new market in that way. But I think for us, it was a winning combination.
yeah, especially because product had such a played such a big role in it. I think if you guys tried, message testing and marketing first before you did this, sales experiment, you wouldn't have had all those product innovations to work off of. So it probably might have even just failed because you didn't know that the product needed to have these certain things. So I think that was such a good call. Was there like a reason why you guys chose to spearhead it with sales instead of marketing? Like, did you kind of intuit that, or was it just luck?
You know, I think honestly, it had to do with the fact that I had a lot of belief in the opportunity and marketing did not report to me, but sales did. So, like, I felt it was an important bet to make. And I took the resources I had and I tried to make that bet in a way I could control to start. And it was really as idiosyncratic as that. Like, I think it just was a matter of belief, and I think you're right that if we had just gone about it in a more traditional way of, like, market and message testing, we may not have ever made the bet, because I don't think we even knew enough to test at that point. It took putting humans into conversations for us to figure out where to go next.
Mhm. Other than, getting into this enterprise market, what was the other, like, biggest, win that you're directly involved in at Vanta?
Yeah, I'd say one of the other huge wins has been a real investment in retention. And it relates to the enterprise investment, but when we started out, we had all the success with founders and startups. as you can imagine, those smaller companies, they have their own cycles. They often don't stay in business as long. You end up with retention when you have a down market business that is lower than you want it to be. One of the other things we uncovered is that when we saw customers not stick with us, in most cases, it was because they didn't onboard successfully. So we ended up putting a huge amount of effort into rebuilding the way we did post sales. So we took our customer success team at the time and we broke it into two functions: customer success and account management. We defined those responsibilities really cleanly. We made our customer success team responsible for onboarding and adoption, and ultimately the outcome of that being gross retention. And over the course of a couple of years, we were able to raise net retention by more than 18 points. And like it was 1,000 small things that got us there, but ultimately at the heart of it, the work was about understanding the value our customers were trying to achieve from the platform and then helping them realize that. That looked very different for startups than it did for enterprises, but we have gotten much better at both of those things. And what we found is when we can help our customers get onboarded, get live on the platform, and then realize the value, our retention results are just radically different. So that journey has been a hard one. I've got an incredible post-sales leader, Kelly Bray, who has led a lot of that effort. And it looks very different than it did, but that's one we're particularly proud of.
That's awesome. And I think retention is so, so incredibly important, especially in like a recurring revenue business. The revenue needs to recur. So like retention is important. And I don't think enough companies and CROs give the amount of love that they should be giving to their customer success department and everything
It's
that can be done with
a
that.
huge part of the value. Yeah. I mean, this was another kind of counterintuitive bet that we made on customer success at a time when a lot of companies were cutting it. RCS is foundational to our success. They are a huge part of why we continue to grow. To your point, as the revenue targets get bigger, you need your customers to be successful in staying with the platform. If they're not, it becomes very hard to grow past a certain point. So, our customer success team, our account management team, they've done an incredible job getting our customers successful, realizing value, and keeping them with us over the long haul and just making sure they can achieve all their security compliance goals. So we grow with them, and our CS team has been a big part of how we've done that so successfully.
Awesome. That is so great. And I know you got to run. So thank you so much, Stevie. This has been a wicked conversation. Um,
My
yeah,
pleasure. This
I'm
has been
excited for
really
everyone
fun.
to hear it. Yeah.
Me.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to the episode. If this resonated, please give us a 5-star rating and a follow. It helps us reach more people, and you get our latest and greatest content without having to search for it. And if you're looking for hands-on help in go-to-market strategy and/or RevOps, please reach out to us. We help our clients with everything from annual planning to improving processes in go-to-market, implementing systems to support those processes, and go-to-market AI. We're always happy to offer a free consultation to help you identify the best opportunities to improve your go-to-market engine with or without our help. You can find us at unionsquareconsulting.com, and the info will be in our show notes.